I came from Australia where we can drink. I mean, we had a bar at high school. So we did a startup, went from 0 to 150 employees back to 0 in 19 months. But I had an office in Helsinki, had an office in Singapore, and an office in Mountain View, and commuted between them. Meanwhile, going back to business school every other weekend. So there were plenty of weekends where I would work till 3 or 4 o'clock Helsinki time, jump on a plane to New York, plane from New York down to DC, go to school, 1 to 8 p.m. on Friday, 8 to 8 on Saturday, 8 to 1 on Sunday, jump back on a plane and fly back to Helsinki. Ran a wine startup for a year and a half. That was amazing. Best job ever. I think a lot of founders and employees and everyone get frustrated when they join the company and it either has no culture and it's being formed, like at the very early stage, and they were hoping it would be magically everybody knows how to work together and all that sort of stuff. Or the reverse, the culture is so ingrained that they want it to be something different.
Hello friends, my name is PJ Gupta and welcome to Checkbook Chronicles with PJ. Today we have a wonderful episode for you with Peter Hazlehurst. Peter Hazlehurst is currently CEO and founder of a company, Synctera, which is changing the game in banking as a service. Peter has an amazing background. He is originally from Australia. He was one of the earliest employees at Yodlee, a FinTech pioneer. He has had influential roles in 3 important companies, Nokia, Google, and Uber. And currently, he is spearheading Synctera's foray in FinTech and payments. With that, I will hand it over to my guest. Here's Peter.
Hey,
Welcome,
thanks,
Peter.
PJ. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Maybe if you could spend just a little bit of time talking about your past and some of the companies and the work that you've done.
I guess the easiest way to think about it is I have this oscillating career. Small startups, crazy startups, then go work at a big company and then realize, oh, maybe big company's not for me. Go do some more startups, work for a big company and keep going. And that started at the beginning when I was really young. So I came to the US when I was 20. And it was pretty funny because I came from Australia where we can drink. I mean, we had a bar at high school. Don't tell the school. And then landing here and I couldn't rent a car. I couldn't drink a beer. And landed in Wilmington, North Carolina, which was allegedly close to Raleigh, but it wasn't. And that mattered to me because I thought I'd go back to college because I quit school in Australia to come here. And I'm like, I have landed in the deep south. It was very shocking, let's say. But we did something really crazy. We started a new company from scratch and said, let's go build a banking system. And in those days, this is pre-internet, yes, there was a time before the web, banking was all done on old IBM mainframes and AS400s and stuff like that. And around the world, there'd be the IBM clones, the Amdals and the Fujitsus and stuff. But it was all basically IBM mainframes, written in COBOL for the most part, the really big ones written in assembler. And so we just said, hey, Windows had just come out, Windows 3.1. So the world was suddenly understanding you could do, the user experience on a consumer PC could be possible. And Unix was starting to happen.
Yep.
So we started this company from scratch that said, I'm going to build a core banking system all over again. And the cool thing about it was, because we were all idiots, there was only 1 or 2 of us that actually knew what banking was. Not me, I didn't know. And being ignorant / an idiot, I said, sure, let's go build a banking system. How hard could that be? And 31 years later, they're still building it. And it's still for sale. A bunch of the folks that we started the company with still work there. Still runs banks in the US. It's crazy. And much of the code is the code we all worked on 30 years ago.
Wow.
Which is kind of cool. So it's rare that you work in tech where something actually survives very long.
Yeah.
Our industry is very cyclical and quick.
It is cyclical.
So I did a bunch of early stage stuff with this company called Phoenix. One of those weird things, we got lucky. We took it public in '96. That led me to doing some .coms, which were unpleasant for the younger people in the audience. This is when the world came to an end, and everybody thought that sock puppet websites would be the future of everything.
And pets.com.
Pets.com, the sock puppet, yeah, exactly. And Yeah, it was a crazy time. I remember coming out here to Silicon Valley one time. We didn't even have a slide deck, and we got an offer of $750 million to go public.
Those were unreal times.
And so every time you came back, if you had any traction,
Yep.
things just went off the charts. It all came to an end. So we did a startup, went from 0 to 150 employees back to 0 in 19 months.
Wow.
Which was hard. Did a bunch of other ones, and then we was really lucky, worked with a team in Pittsburgh, and we built mobile email on an appliance. I think at the time, it was 2002, 2001, the only way to do email on your phone was a BlackBerry.
Yes.
Or pretty much. And there was these horrible devices from Microsoft running Windows CE Compact Edition, otherwise known as Wince. And so we built this appliance that would transform web pages into the web browser of your phone, and you could text in your email, you could see images and so on. It was really cool. We sold it to Nokia. And so for a year and a half or so, took that product, scaled it out inside the Nokia framework. So small company, big transformation. Nokia was really fun. We were king of the world at the time. It was amazing. And then got an offer to come to Silicon Valley, which had always been my end state, to run a tech team first, engineering team at a company called Yodlee, doing online banking for big banks.
When you were at Nokia, what part of the country were you in?
I was based in Pittsburgh, theoretically, but I had an office in Helsinki, had an office in Singapore, and an office in Mountain View, and commuted between them. Meanwhile, going back to business school every other weekend. So there were plenty of weekends where I would work till 3 or 4 o'clock Helsinki time, jump on a plane to New York, plane from New York down to DC, go to school, 1 to 8 p.m. on Friday, 8 to 8 on Saturday, 8 to 1 on Sunday, jump back on a plane and fly back to Helsinki.
In other words, life of a founder.
It was crazy. It was like, I don't know. I was really lucky that Nokia was cool with the travel.
Yeah.
Because I had to be back at College Park every other weekend. But that year it was pretty funny. I slept in my bed 23 nights.
Wow. Wow. That is what it takes. But it gave you the experience that is very rare. I mean, you were at a big company which was the king of its platform and its vertical at that time. And you were doing your MBA.
Yeah.
And you were in the process of what is typically a very arduous task, to take a startup and to fit it inside a big, large organization which already has very established procedures with it.
Yeah, exactly.
And like you said, 23 nights you slept in your bed. I can only imagine the number of miles you must have accumulated there.
Total mileage on planes is like 4 million or something. So
there you go.
No, you don't. It turns out that accumulating miles is not actually a thing. And holding them as a balance is like a depreciating asset. So the moment you have them, you should spend them on upgrades.
Yeah.
Never hoard. Hoarding mileage is a loser's game.
Those are words of advice from Peter. Take that to heart. Keep going, Peter.
So anyway, came to Silicon Valley, which was really cool, and worked here for 7 years or so at Yodlee, and really sort of transformed the engineering team, built new products, created all the things like account verification and others, like Plaid and others, built a funds transfer system between B of A, Chase Wells, and everybody else, me-to-me transfers back when that was actually a really novel idea back in 2006. Built a bill pay system to replace CheckFree and others. It was kind of cool. We built a lot, and then we built a data business, which was really interesting and became a foundation of Yodlee's future success.
Yeah.
I left Yodlee to go work at Google, work on payments, and first across all of the platform, but then really focused on Google Wallet and getting Tap to Pay launched for consumers, and unblocking NFC on the Android platform, which we did with Android 4.4. So it was a very awesome time. After that, I was burned out. Google was pretty intense for me, and so I took a bit of a break, did a couple of fun non-profit-y type of startups, ran a wine startup for a year and a half. That was amazing, best job ever. And then ended up at Uber, where I was running payments and risk. And at Uber, pretty complicated place, 70 countries, money movement everywhere. The challenge was first harmonize the payments engines across the different geographies and all the integrations. Because imagine all different types of PSPs across the globe, everything, and every possible payment method, thousands and thousands of daily trips, millions of trips paid in cash.
Yeah.
You've got so much complexity. So Uber was super fun, 24/7. Part of the gig at Uber was to create a driver-facing community bank experience, like banking for drivers. We called that Uber Money. And that really was transformative, and we launched that at Money 2020. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And the world effectively
Changed.
came to an end for a while. And affected Uber quite considerably.
Yeah.
And so it seemed like the right time for me to sort of say, what do I want to do next? And having oscillated to the big company,
Yeah.
sort of dived in and said, let's go do it all over again and start Synctera.
Wow. What would you say would be the most important lessons that you learned now that you've founded your company and you reflect back and say, hey, that was what came in really handy, so that the people who are listening would understand, what a big company can provide, what a smaller company can provide, and what kind of experience really goes on to help when one starts their own company.
So it's kind of interesting. A couple of days ago, I was up at Stripe's conference, Stripe Sessions. And Patrick was doing this amazing interview with Jensen, the founder and CEO of NVIDIA.
Yep.
And what I took away from that was there's certain value in wisdom. And wisdom guides you away from falling into the same traps from before without some new way of thinking about it. And it's pretty hard to read wisdom. You can't open a textbook and say, oh, I'm now smart, or I understand the history of the universe. Great, but then how do you play it back? And so what I would say is all companies have culture.
Yep.
It's a fool's errand to try and change a big company's culture. Can't do it. And you'll just be treated like a virus that needs to be killed. And so you have to realize if you want to join a big company, know that you're going to join in the way they want you to join. And so the learning for that would be, as you're thinking about career directions and paths and stuff like that, if you have a really strong sense of identity around what matters to you and what's important to you, you have to find places that share that vision or share that sentiment. And I think a lot of founders and employees and everyone get frustrated when they join the company and it either has no culture and it's being formed, like at the very early stage, and they were hoping it would be magically everybody knows how to work together and all that sort of stuff. Or the reverse, the culture is so ingrained that they want it to be something different. And having a really good understanding of what you need to be successful for yourself, and then realizing and being able to deduce what the company you're going to work with is really critical.
Well said. I will corroborate that by saying that has been my experience too. A company culture is one of those things that is the most important part. It's also the most difficult part, because the problems that seem easy are actually the hard problems, human problems. People have their own ways of looking at things. Two people could look at the same issue, the same process, the same problem, and feel that they're doing the right thing and come up with two opposite ways to attack it. In terms of culture, let's talk a little bit more about it, because that is what defines the great from the good. The companies that have gone on to do great things have great cultures. Great cultures meaning collaborative cultures. What, in your opinion and in your experience with the companies that you've been with, have been some of the qualities, some of the ways that you've seen companies build good and great performing cultures, both at the enterprise level and at the startup level?
So I think I've worked at 3 good-sized companies, Nokia, Uber, and Google. And they all have distinctive cultures. Nokia is pure egalitarian, and another way of saying survival of the fittest. And so they believe great ideas just work. And they have a platform structure, and totally everybody's equal. They have saunas at most offices. And the executives and men and women go into the saunas, and there's no hierarchy. There's not like the CEO sauna. There's a company dining room. Jorma Ollila, the CEO, the chairman, he would just come and grab a tray and sit, and people would hang out with him. Totally cool. That's one style. Google's culture is very shared culture, shared consciousness, like group alignment, group focus on where to go and how to do things. And so if you go to Google and you're a top-down sort of like I'm CEO, king, boss type of thing, you'll fail at Google because everybody wants to collaborate and be together and stuff like that. It's very much a good idea is the best idea, but there's also this strong belief in healthy debate on every topic. So it takes a while to get the momentum going, but once the momentum's going, it's awesome. And then Uber is like a super interesting culture of fast thinking, fast debate, very in-person culture. So COVID for me, and I think for many folks at Uber, was quite challenging because suddenly you weren't in the room talking through issues. But quite a more energetic culture and an operation-centric culture. And so I guess, I don't know, culture comes from the types of people that come together and how they are complementary. You don't want everyone to be the same. Then your culture will be very groupthink and really unfun. So you want all these different sorts of perspectives. It comes from having people that want to share what their perspectives are. So I find it really hard to work in companies where everybody is like secretive about themselves.
Yeah.
Because you just don't know how you're being perceived. You just don't know, are you joining together in the same mission and goals? Or are you just sort of coming there for a transaction and work experience?
Indeed. Let me take that. You said diversity is important, and we're talking about culture. And we've talked about culture as, one example that you took, shared values. How do you align those two, diversity and shared values? Because at a certain level, everybody in the group has to be a part of the shared culture, the shared values. Because there are people, and in fact, the majority of the corporate world is top-down, is hierarchy-driven. And there are people who do good work in there, and they're used to a top-down culture. Are you saying that we should simply ignore those people? Or how is it that when you form a company, what qualities and attributes would you look for to get the best talent and to make sure that there are going to be, that it's diversity within the culture that you're setting up, as opposed to diverse from the culture?
So I would say to sort of address like company style, there are many styles of companies and many phases of companies. At the earliest stage, the founder or founders, the earliest employees will be creating culture by default because people are just being and existing. It's going to be top-down or knowledge-down because there'll be someone who says, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. And until you get to a certain scale, there's always going to be the impact of that nucleus of ideas or nucleus of focus. And that's not a bad thing. You can end up with companies that totally always exist that way. Tesla is a perfect example. Elon is the quintessential, this is what we're building, team go execute. And those companies can be really successful. Other companies culturally don't want to be in a militaristic top-down structure and want to be much more collaborative in decision-making and so on, and can be perfectly successful too. It's just a different style. The thing that's important, though, is if you want to be in a collaborative culture and you go to a company that's top-down, or you want to be top-down and go into a collaborative culture, neither of those will end up in a happy place unless you're really prepared to develop yourself and grow.
I would say those are words of wisdom, because that has been my experience too, in terms of the fundamentals of culture. How much of it is collaborative versus how much of it is top-down, and where's the dividing line between them as perceived by the individual? Because the way you look at it will define how you perceive it and where you fit in. So as an individual going into one, as a founder creating one, and then making sure that everybody knows where the dividing line is.
I think the trick is you have to have some set of beliefs of what you want this place to be. Bonus points if you publish them so people can actually read them. But if it's working right, everybody will share those values in some way, shape, or form. And the people that don't share those values will either come to the company and say, I want to learn something new. Or they'll come to the company with the goal of trying to help bring something new to the table, which from a diversity perspective could be really interesting. We could just have this blind spot we didn't realize and somebody's new perspective will come in. I think the challenge will be when that person comes in with almost an intention to change the culture. Because I think that's really hard, unless there's something fundamentally wrong with the culture and you're changing it for good. It's really difficult to be the one person that says, hey, I'm championing this new cause.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Let's switch gears a little bit. Where it's still related to culture, but let's switch gears and talk about some of the challenges in forming and starting a company. Because culture is important, you're building culture, but then ultimately a company needs to build a product, and you need to get a product market fit. And you need to do it in a way that aligns with your culture. Maybe if you can talk a little bit about Synctera and the foundations and how you put those two things together. The culture that you wanted to build, the product that you wanted to build, and how did you go about getting the first few people?
So starting Synctera in August, September of 2020, in the heart of COVID, nobody knew how to create culture on Zoom. So we were making it up as we went along. We had a hypothesis, more interaction was better. So we started the company with daily stand-ups, the whole company. And obviously the company was smaller, it was like 5 to 10 people. Everybody talked about what they were doing, everybody said challenges and successes and so forth. And we started from the get-go being hyper-transparent. Culturally, being transparent has pluses and minuses. The plus side is the whole team knows where everything is.
Yep.
There's alignment. There's shared empathy if things aren't going great. The downside of being super transparent is when things don't work out, people that will feel the pivot, they'll feel the movement across the organization, the oscillation. And some people will be uncomfortable with that. But you have to decide, are you transparent or I'm not transparent? Are you sharing, are you not? And culturally, you deliver that through communication. Everyone's in their PJs, working from home, PJ not included. And you sort of trying to get people to come together.
Yep.
It seemed to work for us. We tapered it back as we got a bit bigger to every 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And we've landed on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Whole company, all the time.
Yep.
One session Tuesdays, product launches, new things we're doing, excitement, promotions, that sort of stuff. Thursdays, AMA. And this one's hard. So I learned this at Google. So we had TGIF. Mm-hmm. And Larry and Sergey and all the founders and all the product leaders would answer any question.
Yep.
And so people would come to the open mic at Charlie's in Building 40
yep.
and say, hey, I hate this product decision we made, or why did we buy that company? Their values are different. And there was nothing off limits. It was amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
And coming out of fairly buttoned up banking, I was like, what
Yeah.
the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
This is insane. That evolved even more so during tough times at Uber. And so when I was lucky, I joined Uber after much of the challenges had been resolved. But we had this weekly all hands where people could ask any question, vote them up, Slido. It's hard to be answering literally every question and not saying I'm not going to answer that.
Yeah.
We do that at Synctera, and it's a forum where we allow anonymous questions, which is always risky, but it gives some people more space if they don't feel comfortable asking a tough question. And it comes back to culture. Rightly or wrongly, I'm pretty transparent. Some people don't like the transparency and wish I would tone it down a bit. But most people, I think, realize that I want us to have a place where we can talk about stuff, good and bad, and be as straightforward as possible. That's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And when we bring people into the company, we're very deliberate. We talk about how we are going to be. We look for complementarity and not groupthink. We look for different experiences and backgrounds in order to broaden the types of thinking that can go into a problem. And then we align that around like, okay, now we've got to build stuff. And how are we going to operate within that constraint?
Let me ask you a difficult question. What has been a challenge or some of the challenge in keeping up with the culture of openness and transparency?
You have to invest in it. So it takes time to plan communication, command events to keep the team aligned. And I think a lot of folks think you can just sort of wing it and do it. You can't. Being a leader in general has some innate skills. Are you a good communicator? Are you a good speaker? Are you empathetic? But there's also a bunch of learned skills, like learning to say the same thing 3-4 times until it resonates and gets through to the team members.
Yeah.
Learning to think clearly, be able to answer all the unpleasant questions that come along inevitably. It requires resilience and the ability to sort of navigate through things that are unexpected. That's what's expected of a leader and what's sort of some of the critical skills. But you can learn some, and some you get given. But the team doesn't care how you know it. They just expect it to come from you. And as a result, when you're fostering a culture of transparency and communication and fairness and stuff like that, you spend way more time preparing for presentations and communications than you would if you were just winging it and saying, I don't really care. My team is transparent. I can switch them out. If you're in that mode, people will see that, and you'll get very transactional. You can get lots of really smart people that will work for really high dollars, but they won't actually really care what happens to the company.
Interesting. That is very interesting because, and the way you articulated it, you could get a lot of really smart people, but they won't really care. And that is a dilemma that I believe a lot of founders will end up facing, including me. That you have to make a distinction between, are you looking for just a skill set, and you're looking for just a person who can solve the problem, or are you looking for a person who can solve the problem in the way that it aligns with the company's culture? And how far is a founder willing to go in order to get things done? And generally speaking, having a culture that is all-encompassing, I believe, in my experience, has created a shift to the side of, hey, if you're not aligned with the culture, this is not going to be a long-term fit. So you can get short-term results, but not long-term. And if you're aiming for the long term, then the culture supersedes. Would you agree or disagree?
Look, the way to think about it, particularly in tech and product, is every 12 months, every 24 months, a new language becomes the language du jour.
Yeah.
And so hiring some amazingly gifted engineer that understands one language is great, but if they don't actually understand how to think about language, they're only good for you for 2 years. And what I always shoot to hire people with natural intelligence, the ability to adapt to reasoning and logic. I'll make a prerequisite that they understand the technical domain. But the technical domain knowledge is this transient thing that is useless after 12 months, 24 months. And what we're really looking for is these adaptable people that are great. Mm-hmm. So culture of adaptability can trump domain expertise. It's perfectly reasonable to have domain experts, but maybe they're contractors, or maybe they're in a different type of structure within the company if you need them for this use case or that use case.
Good point. How do you measure adaptability? Because it's difficult.
I wish there was a curve.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's something in the DSM-5, but I don't know what it is. But I don't know if you can measure it, but you can see it in action. You can see it.
Is that where the wisdom comes in?
I think so. I feel like I get a pretty good vibe of when I meet someone.
Yeah.
And pattern match them to, I know that person, they sort of seem similar in behavior and structure and so on. And we all have this. We all have the vibe that we get when we meet somebody new. In business or in employment, so to speak, that vibe of the 1 or 2 weeks of evaluation process needs to sort of be forecastive of a 2 or 3 or 5 year relationship. So the stakes are pretty high. I think wisdom does help in that sort of short interaction, high impact type of decision making. Just experience, right? I don't know if it's even wisdom. It's just when you've met 10,000 people for a job, it's different than when you've met 8.
True. Let's we're talking about culture. We're talking about the short term and the long term. We're talking about determining factors like adaptability. All of these go from the realm of what we consider official and corporate and work and profession to personal. You've got all of us have a personal life and friends, family. And all of these attributes, we're one person, and we're the same individual that is doing our work, that is doing our personal life. And these attributes and qualities cover both. What are some of the challenges that you faced? I mean, you've been at multiple enterprise companies. You lived out of a plane. You have founded companies. What are some of the attributes that you would say in your personal life that have helped you in your professional life, whether serendipitous or planned?
I don't know about if it's my personal attributes, but I think one of the things that I sort of carry from business to personal and life to business and so on is a pretty strict no asshole policy, where particularly at work, you don't want to have the crazy but amazingly talented person on your team that destroys culture every day because they're inconsiderate or whatever. And we do this in every part of Synctera, from the hiring process where anybody can veto anybody, no questions asked, and to allow the freedom to be not title-driven in evaluation and so forth. So we do that. We do that with our customers. We do it with our business partners, and sometimes it means we turn away business. We say, I don't want to work with those people. I don't think their behavior is worth tolerating for the deal. And there's some level of people have different cultures, and you can sort of adapt to that. But if people are just rude or obnoxious or disrespectful or unethical, life is too short to spend time with them. And I try to pick people I hang out with in the real world under the same rules, which is find people that are interesting, different, diverse, cool backgrounds, as many different sorts of universes of skill sets and backgrounds. If it were up to me, I'd be a musician.
Which instrument would you play?
Well, I would actually conduct at this point, but I played flute and piano in high school.
Nice.
And the hard part about being a musician is it's extremely difficult to make money. And you can make an okay living, but you can't have outsized things. And I was always a little bit forward thinking about what was it going to be like when I was an X or a Y and stuff like that. But anyway, so the people I want to hang out with have perspectives on things. I dislike people without opinions.
You dislike people without opinions?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What if their opinions are so counter that it is affecting not the cultural element of it, but the process or the product element? How do you deal with that?
So really important. Like, I don't think it makes sense to hang out with people where you find what the other person believes to be abhorrent or horrible or difficult. You can make them acquaintances and so forth, and you can interact with them. But I think if you're in an organization and you have such divergent views on topics that you can't even communicate in the office about the real work, it's not going to work. And by definition, that requires some people in the organization to sort of lean out and say, this is what I believe in, and have their sense of values and so on. And that will mean, by definition, some people are not aligned to those things and won't want to join.
Yep.
Which I think is better than having teams or factions in the organization that fight amongst each other culturally, even though they're trying to succeed together on the product side. Right. And I think it's super hard when you're in a broad horizontal product category like banking and payments and stuff like this to completely be 100% neutral.
Yep.
We all can agree, well, actually it's so hard in the US. There are relatively few things that are super obvious and everybody's aligned on.
Yeah.
And being public about what you think they are is important. And even when you think everybody's on the same page, you'll realize you've excluded some community, and it's quite difficult to do that. But I'm much more of a mind of being thoughtful about and respectful of everybody else's ideas, but being transparent about what I believe. And sometimes that means you end up people not wanting to hang out with you, and that's okay.
Interesting. Peter, what in your opinion is the big trend in FinTech? FinTech was all the hype in 21, 22. What is the trend today in 24?
So I would say I'll call it a flight to quality. So there were a whole bunch of companies that were funded late 2020, 2019, that sort of time period, all with variations on a theme of the same general sets of ideas. There were a number of folks like us in banking as a service platforms. There were a number of folks in particular verticals of payments, whether it's push to card or whatever. The cool thing is, over the crucible of innovation here in Silicon Valley allows for those things to happen, and then the best companies continue. There's a bunch of churn for the people that were tied to the companies that didn't succeed. But you end up in a place where you're 2 or 3 long-lived players. And it's nice to see some of that clarity coming to the market now. So we spend less time competing against folks that are just sort of disrupting the industry without creating much value. And so anyway, so there's a change in culture around like how teams are getting structured and invested in and so forth. And what that means is, if you're a buyer of platforms like ours or yours, your selection is smaller, but the companies are better.
Yep.
And they're more long-lived. So I'd say that's one thing. I think there's a little bit of activity going on with AI and FinTech in some verticals.
Yep.
I think in retail banking and so on, there still needs to be a lot of regulatory support of how you use it and what you use it for.
Mm-hmm.
It's very strict.
Do you think AI is going to fundamentally affect FinTech? Because what we're seeing in AI, which is sort of an overarching word for a specific domain within AI, which is language learning models, or learning models in general. Do you think they will critically affect? Because
here's the AI that I want, and I stole it from Matt Harris. It's a bot that every single morning surveys every bank account that's possible, looks at the cost to move, and moves my money, and optimizes my balance every day. And it does it every single day with my mortgage, and does it every single day with my credit card debt, and basically seeks to find the best deal on the internet for me, taking everything into consideration, switching costs, documentation, can it self-sign, all that sort of stuff. When that exists, we'll have flattened the money pool in the US, akin to buying stock of Google. It didn't matter which broker you buy it from, the process is the same. We don't have that for banking right now. Mm-hmm. And we're stuck behind process and structure that AI can help with. And the most adaptable banks will be on the forefront of this and say, I'm an open book, I'm always the best price. Or I'm not the best price, but I'll tell you why. And this concept of bringing the miracle of 34th Street to banking, where I'm not your right bank, but your bank over there is just right for you, and the value you create for the customer of showing that you're the best advisor of how to use their money is going to change the market pretty tremendously.
That is well said. How long before you think where we can have that at the tipping point?
On checking accounts, 24 months. On loans, 3 to 4 years.
Very interesting. Anything in the future that concerns you about FinTech?
Not really. I think what's more interesting is hoping that the regulators will come in and say, here are the rules. Because right now, there's rules for banking, there's kind of rules for lending, there's kind of rules for money transmission, but there isn't a set of rules that govern what does it mean to be a neobank, whose KYC rules apply, and all that sort of stuff. And then I think compliance becomes a moat for those folks that have built infrastructure to support it, like we have at Synctera. But it also makes the customer experience safer. Because ultimately, there's an end user that trusts their money being deposited at a place, or expects that their debit card is going to work when they go to an ATM machine. And when that doesn't work, and it doesn't matter whose fault it is, the whole ecosystem falls over.
Finding a product market fit for any startup is the first inflection point. And depending on whether it's a D2C, direct-to-consumer, or a B2B business, the playbooks can be wildly different. What, in your opinion, or when you started Synctera, was the thing that helped you achieve product market fit, particularly from being able to sell successfully?
So I think the challenge with building a platform in banking and payments is you've got to do so many things at least a little bit before any one customer can come to you. And so it's this utility model where you basically have to build everything before anyone can even do the most simple use case. So first and foremost, you have to have investors that understand that and are going to back you through that journey. Because if they think you can just launch a debit card tomorrow, there's a lot more stuff to it than that. But what we chose to do deliberately at Synctera, which seemed to work for us, was use PR and communications as our strategy for customer engagement. For the longest time, and still today, almost all of our engagement with customers is inbound. And that comes from creating a persona in the market of doing software well, building products that work okay, and operating them well, and avoiding, wherever possible, any sort of contagion from regulatory risk and so forth. And the challenge for that, when it's inbound only, is you don't get to say, I only want to work with this type of company or that type of company and get really focused. You have to have this broad solution set. So it creates one thing that's really important, which is the adaptability of a roadmap. As this new interesting customer comes along, do you have enough capacity or flexibility in your team to say, stop that, do this, now we've got a new category?
So, Peter, challenges all the way, challenges in culture, challenges with people, challenges potentially in personal life with the kind of schedule that a founder and CEO or anybody in position of influence needs to maintain. It can bring down the very best. You can start with perfect mental health, perfect physical health, and it can be brutal because everything, the buck stops with you. What has it been like for you? Would you like to share any challenges, any moments in time where you felt, I've done everything I could, and this is it? And how did you overcome it?
So I think there's tons of stress and tons of pressure on many people in the team, not the least of which is me. And I spent a long time sort of being in various firefighting scenarios. So that is one of the things where experience and wisdom will help you realize that there'll be a tomorrow and the world is in fact not coming to an end. And so having lived through some pretty crappy times, including 9/11, which was really terrible, you have a sense of gradation of, is it really as bad as it feels like, or it's not? I remember when we launched one of our clients, and they were getting crushed by fraudsters, and everyone else is running around going, oh my God, we're going to die. And I'm like, this is amazing. Best news of the day, the fraudsters love our platform, which means we're a real platform. And everyone was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, if we didn't have fraud, we wouldn't exist. And but the only way you know that is if you've been through this before.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I have a 3-tier hierarchy of things. And the first and foremost is health. And that has multiple vectors: mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, etc. And if you don't have that, then nothing else works. The step above that you really need to think about is friends and family.
Yep.
Surrounding yourself with a cohort of people that care about you, that you care about, and that you can emotionally connect to and can support you. And then and only then can you get to the work side of things. So it's a fairly lonely sport, being a founder and a CEO. I've tried various formats of meeting other CEOs and trying to share empathy and stuff like that. I would say for the most part, it hasn't worked for me. It may work for them. I would encourage everybody, founder or otherwise, to not discount the value of psychotherapy and having a psychologist on your side. I do, and it's great. And it's a it's not coaching. It's not like, hey, you can be better. It's like, tell me what's going on and what matters to you.
Mhm.
And it's a safe space. It's hard. Like, being able to say, I feel worried, is not something you generally want to say out loud.
I will vouch for that. That is something that I think cuts universally across all founders. So can we get the name and address of the therapist?
Ha 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 ha.
But thank you.
HIPAA.
Okay. On that note, I would like to say that that is probably the most salient advice that we can get from this episode, that you have a tiered hierarchy. You've got your health, and then the next level is your friends, family, circle, and then work. Because unless you have that
You can't
in
work
that order,
yourself to be healthier.
yeah. No, well said. Well said. It has to go, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And it has to start there. And I will tell you, as an individual and as a founder, I have at times neglected various aspects of health. And any time I do, whether, again, as you said, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, it has long-term implications. And I would like to tell our viewers how important it is, and there's been much written about it, but it's for a reason. Anything else, Peter, that you would like potential founders to know, people who are wanting to get into the startup world?
It's not as easy as you think.
It never is, but I believe that is what makes it fun, and that is what makes it exciting.
Totally.
So on that note, I would like to thank you for taking so much time.
My pleasure.
And somebody who's got so much background in FinTech and so many scars to show how far they've come, I think is really going to be helpful to the audience.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Great
Peter.
to speak with you,
Yep.
PJ. Thank you.
Well, folks, there you have it. What a wonderful episode with Peter Hazlehurst of Synctera. You saw Peter's amazing story, amazing background, and what he is doing currently. And there were quite a few nuggets and learning lessons here. The hierarchy of priority, the culture and the importance of culture, and not just culture within, but culture without. Specifically, in terms of the kind of customers and partners that you want to work with. So with that, I will leave you with another great episode. And moving into the future, we will have many more founders sharing their personal stories on the obstacles they overcame, the hurdles they overcame, and how they got to where they are today. Thank you for watching.